can be a really quick tutorial into using Adobe Animate. Now, Adobe Animate is actually a developer tool from a long time ago. It used to be called Flash. Before Adobe bought it, it was owned by a company called Macromedia. And for years and years and years, it was a tool that internet users used to create games that you could play online, to create advertisements, but it's always had the ability to do some really cool things with animation. So I want to show you just a couple of those things real quick. I want you to think about this software more in terms of a replacement for paper and pencil and less in terms of a full-fledged animation software suite. There are a lot of cool things you can do in Adobe Animate. You can do in-betweens, tweens. You can do all sorts of really cool transitions. There's a bone tool. All of those things are worth exploring and worth looking into. But right now, I want us to kind of do it the hard way. Like I said, as a replacement for paper and pencil. So even though you can and may even know how to do a lot of those things, I'd like you to try to do what we call straight ahead animation, which means you start from frame 1, then you go to frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, frame 5, frame 6, frame 7, frame 8, and so on and so forth. So if we were doing this on paper and pencil, essentially the way it would work would be you would take a piece of paper, you would draw the ball, you take another piece of paper, put it on top, draw the ball slightly different, another piece of paper, draw the ball slightly different. This just gives us the software. This just gives us an easier way to accomplish that without wasting a lot of paper. To get onto Adobe Animate, you need to make sure you're logging in with your Granite School information. A lot of students are using a 444 login at Granite SD or Granite Schools, and I'm here to tell you that that does not work. What it'll do is it'll give you maybe a 7-day free trial, and then after that, you're out of luck. The only place they use this login, as far as I know, is for the Adobe products. If you go to adobe.com and you click login, you're going to log in with your 9 number at graniteschools.org. So 9875432 at graniteschools.org. When you log in with that, it takes you to the Granite Schools login page, and then it's pretty simple from there. So hopefully you've got Adobe Animate open or downloaded and opened. It does not work on a Chromebook. It only works on Windows PC or Macintosh PC. So when you get it open, this is your splash screen. It might look like this. It may even potentially look something like, trying to get the other window open and I'm not, yeah, there we go. It may also look something like this. So it really just depends on a couple of different factors. It doesn't matter which screen you have, whether you have this screen right here or whether you have this screen right here. You're going to do an HD document. You can do HD or full HD. Again, doesn't really matter. So I'll just click on the new document, hit create. Okay, and then my layout's a little bit different right now. I change it as I move along. Typically, what I like to do is I like to stay in the Essentials workspace. So if you want to, I'm going to reset mine right now, and I'll show you how to do that. I think there's actually 2 places that you can do it. I think you can click here and hit Reset Essentials there, hit yes. Or you can go up to Window and go to Workspaces and hit Essentials, Reset Essentials. Now, I really, it's not critical to me how you lay yours out. It's whatever is most comfortable for you, whatever you think is going to work. This is just the basic setup. So as we start on this basic setup, let's look at a couple of things. First of all, this is my paper. This is my stage. This is where all of the animation is going to take place. Now, right now, I'm fairly zoomed in. I don't like working zoomed in like this, at least to start. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you see it says 100%. I'm going to drop this menu down and hit Fit in Window. That's basically going to show me my entire piece of paper. Now, of course, you can use the zoom tool. You can zoom in or zoom out, or you can drop down and choose different resolutions or different percentages. Like I said, I like hitting Fit in Window so I can see the whole image. To the right are properties about my document. Now over here on the right, it's going to change based on what we're selected on. Now right now I'm just selected on the main stage. So with the main stage, the main piece of paper selected, I have a bunch of properties. Right here is the resolution, which for right now, it's not that critical, but later on you may find that, oh, I want to make sure I'm doing it in HD, or I want to do a 4K or whatever. You can adjust those values there. As we go down, this is the critical one right here. So FPS 30. That means frames per second. That means how many images am I seeing every single second. And now 30 frames is kind of an odd frame rate to start with. 30 frames is typically, when you're using computers or video games, 30 frames is kind of a normal thing. Even some television shows will play back at 30 frames per second, some movies as well. But when we deal in animation, if we go way back to when they first started figuring a lot of this stuff out and they used film, the film cameras, the film projectors would play back at 24 frames per second. So when you animated, you took pictures, and then you played those pictures back, they would play at 24 frames per second. In a lot of cases, especially television today, producing animation at 24 frames a second means that you have to have 24 individual drawings. Now, obviously, there are tricks to get through that. There are tweens, and there are other things that help it so that we don't have to draw 24 individual drawings. But television has even maybe taken a step back from that, and they'll draw at 12 frames per second, meaning that instead of drawing 24 frames to have it be 1 second of film, they'll draw 12 frames to have it 1 second of film. And in order for that to show up, they do what we call animating on twos. So you have 12 individual drawings, but each drawing is photographed twice. So that's when they say animating on twos, that's what that means. It means that I am photographing each image twice. Occasionally, some people will animate on threes. What that means is that they will essentially take each image, they'll take a picture of each image 3 times, which results in a frame rate of 8 frames per second. Now, we're not doing film, we're not doing cameras, and because we're not doing cameras, if we adjust the value here, when we play it back, it still plays back in real time. So instead of having to come in and duplicate each frame twice or each frame 3 times, we can just change the frame rate. And for this first assignment, I would recommend just a frame rate of 12 frames per second. If you're playing it back and it feels like it's maybe too fast, you can try going down to 8 frames a second. If you're playing it back and it's playing too slow, you can up that. So do 8, 12, 24. You don't want to go beyond that. There's really not a need for it. It just becomes unnecessary and becomes more work for you. So I'm just going to change this to 12 frames per second. Over on the left are my tools. Now, I have a lot of students that when they do this, they want to just try dragging out a circle and they call it good. If you don't have the ability to have a tablet to where you can draw this is pseudo acceptable. But when you just draw out the circles and you do that a frame at a time, the animation ends up looking stiff, it doesn't look natural, and ultimately, even though that's a nice clean line, the result isn't as good, and you're not learning as much by doing it the hard way. So instead of grabbing a circle, or even there's a pencil tool on some of yours that will help kind of clean up your lines, what I would recommend is use a brush. Now there are 2 brushes here that you can use to draw. This brush is new to the newer versions of Adobe Animate. It actually has a ton of different settings. If you know what you're doing, you can go in and make some adjustments so that you can have, a better, more fluid brush. For most starter users, just use the regular brush, just the classic brush tool. When you have the classic brush tool, when you select an item over here on the right, you have some options. You don't have a lot of options with the classic brush tool. First, you have a color. Okay, so I can pick, any color. I would prefer you use black, just because when you do onion skinning, which I'll explain in a minute, black makes it a little bit better. If you have another color in mind, it really doesn't matter, because you can always change it later, and you can always, you can always mix it up and that kind of thing. So you've got the color, you've got the shape. Okay, not a whole lot of different shapes. I personally like the oval, the vertical oval. Just for my drawing style, that has a tendency to be the one that I like to use. But feel free to explore and try some of the others at your leisure. So you've got your brush size, shape, and then you've got your brush size. Okay, so obviously the bigger the brush, the bigger the stroke, the smaller the brush, the smaller the stroke. A good, nice, thick line is always fun to play with. Okay, smoothing. Now this is kind of an interesting thing. Most of you are just going to want to leave this alone. Over here on smoothing, if I turn that all the way off and I start drawing, I'm going to zoom in real close on this line and just show you kind of what smoothing does. You can see that there's kind of some jaggedy edges in here. It's just based on the way that Flash develops that information. If we turn smoothing up and I draw, you can see that it takes those jaggedy edges and it smooths it out. Typically smoothing being on is going to be what you want to do, but there may be a time that you're working on something and you want a nice crisp line, and the smoothing is kind of smoothing it out too much. You can turn that off. Again, you feel free to get comfortable with trying different things. Up here on the top, if you've got a tablet, there's pressure sensitivity, so that when you have a light touch, the line is thinner, and when you have a heavy touch, the line is thicker. You have tilt sensitivity, so if your tablet has the ability to deal with tilts, the different angle of the pen is going to give you a different result. So again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's just whatever you feel comfortable drawing in. Once you've played around with that a little bit, you've got to start your animation. Now down here is your timeline. Okay, down here in your timeline is where all of the frames are created. Right now I have one frame. If I draw something on that frame, you see that that little line goes from, or that little circle goes from being empty to being full. That tells me that there's something on that frame. In order to get started, I typically would tell you to make a bunch of blank keyframes right off the bat. Now, the easiest way to make keyframes is to hit F6. Now, every time I hit F6 on the keyboard, you notice I'm creating a new frame. Unfortunately, if I just hit F6, it essentially duplicates each frame. It duplicates the frame that I have on the scene right there. And I don't want that to show up on every single frame. So I'm going to undo this. In order to use F6 effectively, you should have an empty frame. So if I don't have anything in the scene and I hit F6, it's going to create blank keyframes. If you don't have something that's blank, or you need to add additional keyframes, you can always right-click and hold Insert Blank Keyframe. Right-click, Insert Blank Keyframe. And you can keep doing that over and over again. You can also click and drag and move frames around, although I'm hoping you don't have to do that right now. You can also add layers. So if you wanted to have a background layer and a foreground layer, you could definitely do that. You just click the button and you can add different layers. For this exercise though, typically all I need from you is to just draw one layer, just draw a nice simple ball bounce. As you do the story, you may experiment with that a little bit, but typically I want to try to get this close to actual paper as we possibly can. So once you have a bunch of blank keyframes, you're ready to start animating. Well, what am I supposed to animate? Well, for this first assignment, I want you to animate a simple ball bounce. Once you've done the simple ball bounce, I want you to then tell me a story using a ball, and I'll share some examples on the Canvas module. For the simple ball bounce, yes, you could just draw it from your head, but I recommend looking up a reference. There are all sorts of good references out there. If you just go to Google and you type in ball bounce reference, go to images, you're going to see a lot of different images that have the different frames laid out. I like this one, and you can look at it and see how they've kind of created this ball bounce. Now there's lots of theories and other things that go into this. We're not going to look at those right now. Right now, like I said, if you just grab a nice reference, it'll help you to understand, timing, spacing, squash and stretch, arcs, and even if you're just using somebody else's work, if you practice it enough times, eventually it'll stick, and then you'll be able to do it, from memory, and be able to work on the timing and things based on your own sensibilities. So once you've kind of got a reference and you see what you're doing, it's time to start animating. So I put my reference over to the side. I actually don't need it because I've done this enough. But with your reference in hand and you've got your brush ready to go, I think my brush might be, nope, it's right where I want it to be. You start on frame 1 and you draw a ball. I'm not happy with that. Let's see. I'm not happy with that either, but in an effort to try to hurry, we'll just keep going. So once you have your first frame, you're ready to move on to your next frame. Now you can either click on it, or if you use period or comma, you can move back and forth between your frames. So if you kind of keep one hand on the tablet and one hand on your keyboard, that's can be pretty helpful. So once you've drawn your first frame, you move to your next frame. Well, wait a second. In order to animate effectively, I need to be able to see frames behind. If we were doing this with paper and pencil, we would have a light box to where we would lay the paper down, draw our image, put the next piece of paper down, and we'd be able to see our first image through the light box. Well, in Adobe Animate, instead of it being a light box or whatever, we call it onion skinning, and the icon for it is found right here. This is the little onion skin icon. When you click on the onion skin icon, it's going to show you in a lighter color the frames before and the frames after what you're drawing. So this can help you kind of hone in and get your skills a little bit better. So you draw your first frame, move to the next frame, and you're going to draw the next frame. And then you're going to move to the next frame, and you're going to draw your next frame. Oh, and that one's a little bit bad, so I'm going to redo that. Okay, and then you draw your next frame. You draw your next frame. And now I'm doing a really bad job, but I want to just get through this quick so you can start working. So I'm just drawing, just trying to follow my reference, drawing the balls in their different locations, trying to apply squash and stretch, trying to apply the 12 principles of animation. Eventually, this is real bad. Eventually you're going to end up with a completed ball bounce. And mine's a little bit off right now, but it'll work. So I'm going to hit return and watch the playback. You can see that even though I rushed through that, I got that done in about 2 seconds, the animation quality is actually not too bad. And at 12 frames a second, that's playing right about where we want it. So that's all I need you to do for your first assignment is I just want you to recreate a simple ball bounce. Once you've done that, you can turn in the flash file on Canvas. It's super simple. All you just do is go File, Save As, make sure you know where you're saving it, and again, upload it to Canvas under Simple Ball Bounce. Once you've completed the simple ball bounce, your job is going to then be to create a story using a ball some way. Refer to the references that I'll post in the module if that helps kind of jog some ideas or spark some ideas. When we complete the story ball bounce, what you're going to do is you're going to end up exporting that out and adding sounds and editing it. So we'll add a little bit to that later. But ultimately, this is your simple ball bounce. And once you've completed it, you're going to work on a story. Now, if you don't have access to Adobe Animate, hopefully you've at least watched this tutorial to kind of understand how that works. I might be able to post another tutorial on using paper or another piece of software. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. Otherwise, hopefully this is enough information to get you going.